Good morning, Chair Holliday and distinguished members of the Audit Committee. My name is Peter Shirer. I'm the Vice Chair of the Toronto Paramedic Services Unit, Local 416. We represent 1,500 paramedics in Toronto. And with me is the Local 416 Vice President, Ted Avelis. I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to speak before you today on behalf of the dedicated members of Local 416 working for Toronto Paramedic Services. It is crucial to acknowledge the immense challenges that our paramedics face daily, and I must emphasize the profound importance of their work and the significant impact it has on both our members and the community. I would like to draw your attention to the concerning findings of the city's latest occupational health and safety report for the year 2022, released in 2023. Regrettably, Toronto Paramedic Services has been identified as a leader in lost time injuries resulting from mental and emotional stress. This has been a persistent issue since at least 2018, with projections indicating a continuation of this troubling trend. The repercussions of these challenges are far-reaching, affecting not only our members and their families, but also imposing financial burdens on the city. The increased costs related to lost time injuries amount to approximately $8 million, making the paramedic service division with the highest number of such injuries. Compounding this issue is the city's ongoing struggle with recruitment and retention. While our members are appreciative of the recommendations put forth by the Auditor General, there remains a sense of frustration within the ranks. Local 416 acknowledges the city's efforts to address these pressing issues and improve the situation. However, it is essential to recognize that the nature of our work inherently involves operational risks and stress, which have become increasingly untenable. The Auditor General's well-researched recommendations are valuable, but there is a critical need to establish clear priorities for their implementation. Our primary concern is the well-being and safety of our members and the residents of Toronto. Urgent attention must be given to addressing staffing issues, as the current staffing levels have not kept pace with the growing demand of our essential service. The ongoing resignations of paramedics underscore the urgency of this crisis, demanding immediate action as clearly outlined by the Auditor General's report. We have lost some 500 paramedics since 2019, 73% of whom resigned. Local 416 has long advocated for issues outlined in the Auditor General's report and has actively participated in the operational review process. Our members, as subject matter experts, stand ready to offer insights and solutions to improve the system. While we agree with the Auditor General's recommendations, we respectfully urge for formal consultation with our members throughout the implementation process. In light of the shared facts presented in the report, it is imperative that we take decisive action to enhance our services. This will undoubtedly require dedicated resources. Mayor Chow and Council have shown commendable efforts in maintaining core services under challenging circumstances. However, we must strive to do more to better serve our communities, particularly those who are most vulnerable. The findings of this report provide a compelling case for immediate action, aligning with advocacy efforts of our members. Moving forward, it is essential for this committee and the council to prioritize actions that focus on supporting our frontline workers, addressing systemic issues within provincial ambulance services, and committing to necessary investments from both the city and the province. Local 416 stands ready to collaborate closely with the city to address the recommendations outlined in the report. By working together, we can translate identified areas for improvements into tangible enhancements that will elevate ambulance availability and response times, ultimately benefiting the public we serve. In preparation for this deputation, I had to be cognizant of the 5-minute time limit. It is striking that the Auditor General found that 22% of our sickest patients were still waiting at least 3 more agonizing minutes for paramedics to arrive in 2023. We must do better. Thank you for your attention. We welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you for the presentation. Was there a second part or no? Okay. I'll commend you. That I think was five minutes, and I take your point. Are there questions of the speakers? Vice Chair Myers, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So I understand that some of these numbers are consistent with findings that the union and paramedics did with respect to your, I think it was the Code Red campaign. Can you just explain a bit more about that?
So for several years, we have been focusing on the symptom of periods of time when there were no ambulances available in the city of Toronto. And we've had several councillors out for ride-outs, and since 2019, during the pandemic, we have seen a massive increase in the number of times that we have zero ambulances available. It's disturbing to see that these trends are not improving. They are continuing to be very high, and I think the Auditor General's statistics of having low ambulance availability, less than 10 available for some two plus hours a day, is just as concerning and probably more symptomatic of a more symptomatic reflection of what's going on. There simply are not enough active ambulances on the road to handle the call volume that we've seen and the increases of that call volume over the past 20 years.
Thank you. And I guess similar to Local 779, you say that your members are also suffering from issues around morale. Aside from wages, what are the main concerns?
You saw in the Auditor General's report that certainly getting home on time is of a serious concern for our members. Our members work 12-hour shifts, and as you can see, I forget the exact number in the auditor's report, but a significant amount of our overtime continues to be end of shift overtime, which means that you're overrun into those hours that you were supposed to be with your family at the end of the day. We don't pack up our stuff and go home at 7 o'clock if at 6:55, at 7 o'clock at the end of our shift, if at 6:55 we are servicing a call. We can't go home. We have to service that call. And that puts us into people working, I think the auditor's number was an extra 3 weeks a year of time for a profession. Some of that is full shift overtime, but most of it is end of shift overtime. So this has a distressing effect on the morale of our members when they need to get home and take care of their families and take care of, especially after a pandemic when many of these members couldn't see their family members because they were scared of passing on the COVID virus to family members while working, right?
Thank you. Final question. So does the union have recommendations to improve issues such as the time spent, like overtime, for example? Because that's, to me, it seems like if it's 6:55 and you get a sick patient, I don't imagine most paramedics are going to say, okay, my shift is over at 7 o'clock. No matter what the staffing situation is, they're going to stay, make sure the patient is okay, and then leave. So is there anything that we could be doing to improve that, given that those situations are unlikely to ever go away?
Sure. I mean, right off the bat, we could talk about improving the staffing levels, getting them up to par. As we mentioned, we haven't kept up to par over the last couple of years. But I think at this point, include us in the conversation going forward. I think we're not going to obviously resolve this today, but going forward, our medics who are on the front line have some valuable insight, and they can put forward some suggestions. You're not going to take them all, but I think it's important you hear from them, and we're a part of that process going forward.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you both for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher's next, and then Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you. I just want you to comment on the kind of long, it must be very discouraging to arrive with the patient, know there's other patients that need your help, and be sitting at a triage situation for an hour? Or what's the average amount of time that you guesstimate? that
Are you
folks-
speaking of in the hospital through the chair?
Once you get the patient there?
Sorry.
You know the number, right? I believe the number was 3 hours they were sitting in the hospitals. We could reference it again, but it's
Sorry,
a
can't
long
hear
time.
you.
Over 3 hours they were sitting in the hospitals and they were waiting with
Out
patients
of a 12-hour shift?
out of the 12-hour shifts. But Councillor, here's the issue: is this has been an issue for many, many years. It's not a new issue. Ever since I've been around for over a decade, it seemed to be an issue that keeps on getting worse. And I believe it's incumbent on all of us, including the province, to figure this out. We have to do better for our frontline medics.
And I think some of the issue is also, you have to understand, our core business, what we do is take people to the hospital. That is, no matter what, we will be, and we will be there at the hospital for a certain period of time. In periods of time when there's high call volume, hours of time when there's high call volume, there may be longer waits at the hospital just because that's where we end up. But the reality is that we have to be able to handle those surge capacity, not only for the hospitals, but also for the continuing calls coming in. We can't ignore the issue. I've been a paramedic for 20 years. Offload delay has been there for 20 years. It will continue to be a problem.
I'm not sure, I'm just not sure that for 20 years that's been a problem. And 20 years I've heard about the problem, and it is a requirement, it's a legal requirement, and that we can't deal with because it's not a city bylaw. It comes from another level of government. I'm interested in what the union, I don't mean you, I mean CUPE, it's a pretty powerful union, what you've undertaken across the province of Ontario to have that changed. How are you doing that with Local 79, with CUPE Ontario, with health workers? How have you been doing on that?
Our partners throughout the province, there's CUPE Ambulance Committee of Ontario, which is constantly lobbying the provincial government for improved many of the things that were.
I'm talking about this specific situation.
Yes.
How are you doing on that?
So-
You making any headway?
With the province?
A big, powerful union across the whole province. I haven't seen any campaigns of that kind provincially. Have there been any?
KICO does do campaigns.
Pardon?
They do campaigns. There are campaigns, and they are campaigning specifically on this issue. But as you've mentioned, there are legislative requirements that everyone has to meet, including our members. And this is part of the conversation that we want to be going forward and putting solutions, forward to the city and the province.
Yeah, I'll ask about the regulations when I have a chance. Oh, and I've still got lots of time. So, so I'm very interested in that because this isn't my first rodeo on this issue. I understand burnout. I understand the difficulty of the job, no matter which emergency service you are, what you have to deal with. I understand the problems of being on the line and not being able to dispatch. But I'm quite interested in how many times you've been to the province, how you're mobilizing CUPE across the province of Ontario, because that is not, the wait times at the hospitals are very much at the door of the provincial government. So I'd like a little more information on your advocacy and your successes or lack thereof.
Sure. I'll talk quickly, then you can. So we've met with many, MPPs, not only city councilors, on this issue. And, as you see, we have not had success as times are getting worse. They're not getting better. I think what we've never had the ability to do, and maybe what we're asking for, is that we become partners with the city and go to the province together and try to address it as partners, not as butting heads with the province or butting heads with the division or the city.
Is that the case in other municipalities? In Mississauga, are you able to do that? In Durham, have they agreed to do that? And this approach that you're asking for today, have you been successful there? Has CUPE been successful there?
I'm not too sure what CUPE's done in Mississauga and in Brampton. I could talk specifically more about Toronto, but I can look into what successes they've had there, Councillor, and get back to you on what they've done.
I simply mean in this approach of partnering with a municipality to go to the province, that would seem to me that would be the same approach that you'd be taking in these other municipalities in order to have a better push around this issue? Or is that something you're working at provincial level, or QP Ontario is working at, Ted?
Last question.
CAECO does and QP Ontario are doing that, yes. And again, we can gather more information on that and get back to you exactly what
you.
we're doing there.
Councillor Nunziata.
Well, actually, my question was about the hospital. So I know we've been, no, it's been years that we've been talking about ambulances having to spend hours at a hospital. But over the years, we've made a number of motions through council and asking the province. So are you telling me that nothing has changed at all? I thought there was, a few years ago, a report that came back that the hospitals were mandated to cut the wait time because they had a special in the emergency room. Am I correct? Because we've been talking about it for years. Yeah.
I think the key thing to remember is that year over year, we're seeing a 4.5% increase in call volume. We're seeing more calls. And with each one of those calls, as I said before, a certain segment of our time is spent in the hospital. Even if we were to look at alternative destinations, if we're looking at referral destinations, those are solutions proposed, but we still have to go through our legislative requirements to hand over the patient to the next level of care. A paramedic's job is to take a patient to definitive care. And that handover is probably the most crucial point that we have to ensure that the patient is taken care of well of. So even in the best case scenario, we are still in the hospital for a certain amount of time to do our paperwork, to give our report to nurses, to move the patient over to the hospital staff, to register the patient, and then to clean the equipment that we have. So it's part of the job. Can we reduce those times? Have we attempted to reduce those times? In consultation with management and with the service, we've worked very hard at ensuring that we're our time on task. We've even had Six Sigma processes used to look at it, to see we've staggered shifts. Many attempts have been made, but the reality is that in that surge moment, when there are more calls than there are ambulances, you're going to have periods of time where there's going to be a delay, just because it takes us a certain amount of time to actually report to staff and do all the paperwork and the cleanup to be prepared for that next patient.
Also, do you feel that the issue too is that a lot of seniors are they need beds, and there's not enough beds in the hospitals, right? Mm-hmm. So they've occupied all these beds. So there's a delay if someone comes into an emergency to put them in a bed, right? So that's an issue as well. Am I correct?
It is. It's definitely. 20 years ago, when I was a student, I can remember spending entire shifts on offload delay. We don't see that happening now because of things like the EMS nurse program that is in hospitals to try and minimize the amount. But since that time, if you take 20 years and you add 4.5% per year, it's the call volume that has increased overwhelmingly. It's you know, and part of that call volume is that every single one of those patients requires the report, requires a certain amount of time to be spent in the transfer to the hospital. It's better than it was 20 years ago, but the problem is that our volumes have increased so much. I mean, City of Toronto paramedics in a year pick up the entire population, every man, woman, and child of Oshawa, and take them to the hospital. That is absolutely incredible, and that puts a feeling of how big and how huge the job is that we do. And what is more than evident to the union is that we don't have enough staff on the road to do that job.
Just one last question. Do you know what the percentage of calls that come in for ambulances that are not an emergency and people are just using to get to the hospital?
Not off the top of my head.
You don't?
That would be city staff would.
Okay, thank you.
I sense the next question. I sense a question coming up for staff. I wanted to ask a couple. The report, time myself, the report talks about people leaving. And I just wondered, you know, you're in touch with your members. Do they leave to do other jobs, or do they leave to be paramedics in other jurisdictions?
So we try to do as many exit interviews from the union side as we can. A certain percentage, probably a third, and a third.
Okay.
Sort of a third go on to work in other jurisdictions
Okay.
as paramedics. A third go on to something similar as paramedicine, and a third go on to absolutely different careers.
Really?
But the bottom line is that we continue to lose a paramedic a week to resignations. Right up until the end of May is the last stat that I have. And they tend to go, I mean, I can more easily, I can sum it up that when I started, part of my considerations of coming to Toronto were, number one, it was the highest wage. It no longer is. It was the place where the most education and the most opportunities were available to me. And it was a manageable workload. Those are all things that members are saying they're leaving for. Add on top of that, the fact that a paramedic, a brand new paramedic, cannot afford to live in Toronto. They can't buy a house, they need to commute. Those commuting costs are more expensive. So it suddenly becomes a question of, why would I take a job in Toronto when I can go to one of the surrounding services, in Durham's case, make more money and commute less and have a better quality of life?
Is the work inside the city of Toronto vastly different from the work in other jurisdictions?
Just in volume.
Okay.
I think, you know, everything is. I mean, as you know, I remember fondly the time that you were out with one of our paramedics. Sure. And as you saw, our call, we see more in 2 years than someone in some of the surrounding services might see in 5 or 10 years. And sometimes in a career, we may do more calls in 5 years. Our paramedics are the best paramedics in Canada. There's no, hands down, there's no question in my mind, and that's because of the sheer volume they do and the more experience they have. So they are in great demand when they leave Toronto, but we need to keep them here somehow. We need to retain them, and we need to attract them to come here.
See, I'm really intrigued by some of these answers. And part of it is, the irony is that people are all different and they enter workforce for different reasons. Some people may love like a quiet shift and be happy to stay at the hospital for hours, and others would be completely frustrated. And, you know, I want to be busy, I want to be in the action, and, you know, they're dissatisfied. But it doesn't sound like there's a vast difference, except for the volume, right? Knowing that the city is going to be really busy. The types of calls and the profiles aren't necessarily different in the other jurisdictions. So the people moving over are for lots of reasons then, I guess. It's not the city itself that's driving people away. Is that a fair observation?
It's a yes and no. It's a difficult question because obviously things like the opioid crisis and, you know, gun activity are a lot more in the city of Toronto than they are in other municipalities. So they are dealing with a lot more of that. And with that comes the stress of taking that home after. So, you know, it'd be a little bit disingenuous on our part to say that that work is not different. The volume is a lot more here in Toronto. You know, they may deal with one gunshot wound. Our members may get a gunshot wound every shift that they're on, right?
Thank you.
I think, just to add to that, I think as a young paramedic when I started, I loved that pace. I loved having, as you say, I was not a person that wanted to sit at the station not doing something. And I would say the vast majority of our members are similar. But every single one of the calls has a has a cost. It has a cost to, I fell down at a point in my career. It has a cost to each paramedic that eats away at the resiliency needed to continue on. And if we don't afford the individual paramedics the time they need to rebuild that resiliency, then we see injuries pop up.
Thank you. I think everyone asked you questions, so thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.